This week on Aliens Explored, we have a special episode for you. One of our listeners has written in with a tale of a UFO encounter experienced by his own family. Now, although this encounter happened 40 years ago, this will be the first time it has been discussed in public. We are especially honoured to bring this story to you exclusively on Aliens Explored.
Aliens Explored is a weekly podcast exploring famous and obscure cases of UFO sightings, alien abductions and other strange events from both a believing and a skeptical perspective whilst keeping an open mind. I'm Stu Jackson, a professional actor and amateur ufologist with a particular interest in the crop circle phenomenon. I'll be debating that otherworldly visitations are real. The truth is out there.
And I'm Neil Kelly. I'm a professional actor as well and used to work for the military as an intelligence analyst. I'll be arguing from a more doubtful point of view. I mean, it's all a bit far-fetched, isn't it?
So welcome back everyone to another episode of Aliens Explored. I'm one of your hosts, Stu Jackson.
And I'm your other host, Neil Kelly.
And we've got a very special episode this week, haven't we, Neil?
We have indeed. We've gone interactive. One of our listeners has written in with their own story, and that's what we're going to discuss today.
Absolutely. So big shout out to Rudy Payen, who sent us this story, and is actually it's Rudy's grandparents.
Yeah, so it's not quite first hand, although he did also send us a recorded, a videoed interview with his grandparents. So we have got the first-hand account, but Rudy's account is kind of as they told it to him, so it's almost first-hand.
That's right, and it's worth mentioning this interview is in Spanish. Now, I instantly said to Rudy with a great deal of confidence, that's not a problem because Neil speaks Spanish. And you speak a little, don't you, Neil?
I speak a bit. I learned how to do a particular job in Spanish, and I was getting on quite well, but I haven't been studying it for a while. So it's kind of gone rusty, and although I could pick out words, I couldn't and make out roughly some of what they were saying. No, it was nowhere near good enough to follow the conversation.
So my bad. I apologise wholeheartedly for that. I was overselling you then. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to follow the interview itself. But fortunately, Rudy did tell us this story. Now, so I'll give you this story as it was given to us. On August the 6th, 1980. Manuel and Irma Payen were travelling from Odessa, Texas to Mexico due to a family emergency. They set off at around 11 p.m. on the night of the 5th with their two children and Irma's uncle and her brother. So
their two children being their son, who is Rudy's father, and their daughter, who is Rudy's aunt.
Exactly, yes, yeah. yes, because this is Manuel and Irma are Rudy's grandparents. That's it.
Yes. Right.
So, they've been travelling for about 3.5-4 hours. So, you're looking at between 2:30 and 3 a.m. Just south of Marfa in Texas, which is famous in ufology already for the Marfa lights. And they saw something strange by the Chinati Peak Mountains. What they witnessed seemed to be a large fire on the ground set against a mountain. Now, Irma asked if it could be perhaps illegal immigrants trying to stay warm, but her uncle said that was unlikely, as it would catch the attention of law enforcement and basically get them caught. Manuel and Irma then went on to say that the fire started forming and rising up to the top of the mountain before they all realised what it was. Now, fear started to spread throughout the car as what they described to be a tremendously fast spinning disc. It was shaped as if you get a frisbee laid on its face with another one on top of it. So very much disc shaped, with red and yellow coloured smoke which was raging out from the bottom and from the top. Even from that distance, they could feel the force coming from the disc, which was maybe half a mile. Then it starts to follow the car from a distance along the mountains. It would abruptly stop every time they stopped, and when they accelerated, it accelerated as well. At one time, though, the disc crossed over into the street, hovering approximately 40 feet into the air right in front of them. Now, Manuel and Irma's daughter, as this would be Rudy's aunt, recalled that it looked big enough to fit the car into. Now, this is when they all really got scared. The kids started crying and Irma started praying out loud. They'd all heard about abductions and alien abductions happening at the time, so they were all aware of what could possibly happen. Manuel, however, brave man that he was, wanted to catch their attention. He pulled the car onto the side of the road, got out of the vehicle with a flashlight, and then started calling out for the disc to get closer while pointing the flashlight towards them, saying, "Come on, come on." Irma gets out of the car at this point, takes the flashlight off him and tells him to get his ass back in the car, and that they should haul ass up the road. The disc then crosses over back towards the mountains, and Manuel remembers that it moved like a rabbit jumping over weeds.
Just to interject here quickly, listeners, a quick correction here after recording. Where we described the movement being like a rabbit jumping over weeds, Rudy's grandfather was describing more what it put him in mind of rather than the movement itself, which was, we're told, more like that of a frisbee flying through the air. So basically a disc that was constantly spinning whilst moving through the air. Sorry to interrupt, just wanted to make that quick correction there. So anyway, back to the actual recording.
They could all see little windows and lights inside, but there was no sign of anyone or anything controlling it. It didn't make a sound that they could hear, and they couldn't really see what colour it was due to it being dark. Once everyone got back on the road, the disc was still following them from a distance. It would go up and down the sides of mountains. Finally, it went behind one mountain and never came back out on the other side. Now, this was approaching the ghost town of Shafter near Texas, which is when the disc disappeared. They said that only one truck passed them throughout the entire incident, and early hours of the morning, I can imagine that to be the case. The truck itself didn't stop or slow down, it just carried on, so they weren't sure if the truck had seen it as well. And unfortunately, they don't have any proof because, this was predating us all having cameras on our phones or anything like that. In fact, most people wouldn't have mobile phones at this time. To give you a bit of background about Manuel, he's worked in Odessa at a plant for 43 years before he finally retired. So very grounded person, very down-to-earth person. He comments that his co-workers, who he told this story to, said that he was lucky to have been able to see it. His co-workers would even try and go to the same spot around the same time to try and see it, but unfortunately no one ever did. Manuel also talked about an elderly man who worked at the plant and told him that during World War II there was a base stationed in Marfa. The soldiers on the ground would often see lights and would think it was Germans coming to attack. The ones on the ground could see it, but the pilots in the planes would report seeing nothing. Manuel wishes he could see it again and asks if anyone with a similar story around the same area to please come forward. And if you want to message us through either Facebook or Twitter, just search Aliens Explored. We will be more than happy to pass on any messages from any listeners. But there we are, Neil. That's the story as put to us.
Yeah, an exciting story.
It's an amazing story, isn't it?
Yeah, from 40 years ago, but obviously something they've never forgotten. Now, the Marfa lights are a well-documented UFO phenomenon, aren't they? And as you say, people did spot the lights during the war. The soldiers on the ground could see them, but the pilots in the planes above couldn't see anything.
Yes. Now, a lot of the Marfa lights has been attributed to optical illusions. It's I'm not sure why exactly, but they're quite a frequent occurrence. You would just get lights, and they're just So I can see that this elderly gentleman in the plant talking about the lights in World War II. I can imagine that being the Marfa lights, being an optical illusion. I can certainly see that. Now, Rudy did mention, in fact, that his grandfather had read up about the Marfa lights, but that they bore no relation to what he experienced himself.
No,
and certainly it doesn't sound anything like the Marfa lights.
No, I mean the earliest published account of the Marfa lights was in 1883, when a young cowhand, Robert Reed Ellison, saw a flickering light and thought it was an Apache campfire, possibly. And other travellers, other settlers, they saw the lights, but when they investigated, found no ashes or any other evidence of a campsite. There was a group from some Society of Physics students at the University of Texas at Dallas spent 4 days investigating and recording lights in 2004, and they seemed to they used traffic volume monitoring equipment, video cameras, binoculars, and chase cars. What they noted was that US Highway 67 is visible from the Marfa lights viewing location. There is actually a viewing platform, isn't there, that you can go to view the Marfa lights.
Right.
The frequency of lights southwest of View Park correlates with the frequency of traffic on the US 67. The motion of observed lights was in a straight line, corresponding to traffic on a highway. And when the group parked a vehicle on US 67 and flashed its headlights, this was visible at the View Park and appeared to be a Marfa light. And then a car passing the parked vehicle appeared as one Marfa light passing another at View Park. So there is obviously something funny. I mean, people know when they're seeing cars on a road, don't they, even in the distance. So there's obviously something funny about the optics of that location that makes it look a bit odd. Makes it look like that lights on the highway are lights in the sky. But
yes, it's some sort of reflection going on. That's as much as I'm not an optical person, but yeah, as I understand it, it's the lights are getting reflected to somewhere other than where they're actually originating.
Yes, yeah, and but they don't seem to have actually documented. It's actually caused by this phenomenon, and a measurable phenomenon that they can actually say, yeah, this is what it is. In this location you have this, this and this, which combines to cause this, and it will create the illusion of that. They don't seem to have taken it that far, so it's still mysterious.
Yes, but not necessarily a UFO that's causing it. I mean, there's a number of phenomenon that goes on in the world, optical illusions and things like that. They're just totally with no idea how they work or why they work, just that they do. So yeah, I think the Marfa lights as a whole, absolutely we can strike that, but we're talking about a craft here. We're not talking about lights. We're talking about a craft that followed their vehicle that basically interacted with it.
Although it appeared to be on
responded
fire.
to
It was flames blazing out the top and bottom of it.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's quite a unique experience that certainly from the UFO encounters that I've read up about, that one is one I've not really come across before.
No.
So
and it seems that they were close enough to say that, be able to say that, yeah, the thing was definitely on fire rather than these were just lights around it.
Indeed. I mean, to get close enough to see that there are windows in this craft. It's a really, I mean, it's interesting you say it was 40 years ago, but they've clearly not forgotten it. Well, no.
But they also said that it was a rapidly spinning disc, which wouldn't enable you to see windows. There would just be a blur of light, unless there's a bit that's spinning and a bit that isn't.
Could well be. Let me see where it... Yeah. Unless it was only spinning as it moved. And then when it comes stationary in front of the car, hovering about 40 feet above the ground, maybe it wasn't spinning then. Or like you said, maybe it was the edges, the outer part that was... It'd be really interesting to if Rudy's grandparents would draw what they saw. Yeah.
Because I suppose when we think of a spinning craft, we think, well, I'm thinking of terrestrial physics, something like a helicopter, that it needs to keep spinning to stay in the air. And a spacecraft, I know when they've talked about missions to Mars, it would be a spacecraft, a disc that spun in order to maintain a kind of gravity. The centrifugal force will create gravity inside the craft.
Yeah. Whether it need to move that fast is another matter. And when it's within an atmosphere, I mean, Mars is a little bit different because it's got a lower gravity than Earth, so it's not what we're used to. But I don't know. I'm pure speculation there, but it's definitely a fascinating. And thank you so much to Rudy for sending that in. That's,
yes. Thanks, Rudy. And we will encourage. We'd like to encourage all listeners with their own stories. Please do write in with them, and we will do our best to give you airtime on our show.
Absolutely. But let's look at what else can cause these things. So the disc that's being described with, as you say, it's got flames coming out the top and bottom of it, or coloured smoke rather. I mean, that's coloured smoke would suggest to me some sort of exhaust. Maybe that's being lit by the lights of the craft itself. Because if you get ordinary white smoke and then shove a green light through it, it makes the smoke look green. So they're talking about red and yellow, sort of fire-coloured smoke. It might just be that the smoke was being coloured by something else. But I'm trying to think what...
But it was night, wasn't it? So, yeah. I mean, you wouldn't necessarily see smoke at night, would you? I mean, it would have to be lit up for you to see.
Well, exactly, yes. And if it was lit up by something else, that would certainly explain it. But are we talking about a vehicle that's in distress, a vehicle that's damaged, that's crashing? Lots of smoke and fire would certainly suggest that in my mind.
And I'd be interested to know how isolated this spot is. I mean, you and I are both living in London. We don't know what it's like to be... Well, we rarely see actual darkness. We rarely go anywhere where there isn't light coming from somewhere. Britain is too small to have these wide open spaces.
Yes, we experience terrible light pollution. I mean, even our countryside is only 30 miles from the nearest town, city.
And all the main roads would have streetlights, whereas I assume a desert highway hundreds of miles long probably wouldn't. They probably wouldn't bother putting in street lamps for the odd car that was travelling along.
Indeed.
And of course, 1980, things were different back then. It was not that we're going back into the dark ages, but even though there are lights now, this is 40 years ago, isn't it?
It is 40 years ago, but people would know. I mean, if it was a normal terrestrial aircraft, you'd recognise it for what it is.
Or an experimental military aircraft. I mean, it's funny, the story about the troops on the ground who saw lights in the sky and thought it was the Germans coming to attack them. I thought, one thing that the bomber pilots in World War II didn't do was light up their planes. There would have just been this rumbling sound and dark shapes in the sky.
That's very true. And that, funnily enough, that particular aspect of the story did put me in mind of the Foo Fighters, which we discussed, of course, in episode 7.
Yeah. I was thinking also of the O'Hare Airport UFO, where people could see it on the ground, but it couldn't be seen from the air, and it wasn't picked up on radar, or so they said.
Absolutely.
There's no report, so it's something.
I think the difference with O'Hare was people could see an actual craft, whereas what we're talking about here is just the light. So I'm inclined. The skeptic in me, which is usually silenced by the optimist, but the skeptic in me does say that quite possibly this story from World War II around Marfa could well have been the Marfa lights.
It could have been, but that's also an old soldier's tale, and I imagine that soldiers who were stationed in Texas during World War II had probably never been on the receiving end of a bombing raid, so they wouldn't have known. They see lights in the sky that are unknown, and you think, well, we're in a war, it must be the enemy.
Yes, that's very true. Interesting. So, it'd be really fascinating if there was anyone who could corroborate this story. But of course, if they only saw one truck throughout the whole thing,
yes. If that truck driver's out there and listening now, we'd be really pleased to hear from you.
Yeah, tweet as anonymous truck driver. But here's the thing: so you get a UFO encounter like this, the vast majority of people are going to not say anything. That they'll hold on to it and keep hold of it themselves. So when you get a UFO sighting, you actually need quite a large number of people usually for people to come forward. And then once a few people have come forward, it then snowballs and others feel more confident coming forward kind of after the fact. So when it's an isolated incident like this, it does become really hard to corroborate.
But there's obviously something going on around Marfa, and this can't be the only time. If something like that has been around, it can't be the only time someone's seen it. As I say, I don't really know how isolated Marfa or that area of. I assume they were on Highway 67, south of Marfa. How isolated that is, and whether anyone, so apart from that lone trucker.
From a desert to Mexico, I really didn't mention which route it was.
Well, according to Wikipedia, the what do they call it? The Marfa Lights Viewing Centre, the MLVC, looks out over Highway 67. Oh no, sorry, it's. The favourite place on which to view the lights is a widened shoulder on Highway 90, 9 miles east of Marfa. The lights are most often reported as distant spots of brightness, distinguishable from ranch lights and automobile headlights on Highway 67 between Marfa and Presidio to the south.
Right.
So they were, I haven't got the geography worked out, but yeah, they were on Highway 67 or Highway 90.
Well, so absolutely fascinating story. I mean, let's do our usual summary then. So what's your take on this story then, Neil?
My take is that Rudy's parents and grandparents saw something which was very different from what people usually see at Marfa, or what they go to. In fact, they hadn't gone to Marfa to see anything. They were just passing through. They saw something which seems to be very, very clearly defined. They saw it up close. They close enough that they felt threatened by it. That Rudy's grandfather felt he had to get out and issue a challenge to try and distract it from his family. But yeah, it's a very strange phenomena. I say, undoubtedly there are odd atmospherics going on around there, and which have been studied, which do produce, as the group of students from the Society of Physics students at the University of Texas at Dallas found out there is something. They spent 4 days investigating. They recorded lights. They could, let's see, they saw their own car headlights, but they obviously didn't come across just as car headlights. They obviously looked, for some reason, they looked like lights in the sky.
But this certainly seems to be something much more substantial than an atmospheric effect moving the position of lights. I'm inclined to say, so I'm a great believer in looking for, if I'm going to question someone's story, which with the best will in the world, I think we should always do.
If only to find out more, tell us more.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But you've got to ask, why would somebody make this up? And I can't think of a reason. In fact, I think the fact that Manuel then went into work in a plant, which you and I both know, Neil, is quite a strong sort of masculine place to work. Yeah. He risked basically having the piss ripped out of him for it. He could have been ridiculed for it. So, I think he's a very, very brave man. First of all, for challenging a UFO, and secondly, for going and telling people as brazenly as he did. And all credit to Manuel for that. Absolutely fascinating. I can't imagine for one moment why anybody would make this up. So I'm inclined to take Manuel and Irma and Rudy all at their word for it. I think this is absolutely amazing, and even more amazing is that this is the first time this story has been shared publicly, Neil.
Yes, absolutely.
So that is we're absolutely privileged.
We're honoured. Yes,
we are very honoured.
Thank you so much, Rudy, for sharing that with us.
Indeed. So, listeners, what do you think about this story? Do you think there's a lot of credence to it? Or is there something more going on associated with the Marfa lights, perhaps? Do you have any stories of your own that you would like to share with us? We would love to discuss them and debate them on the show and to share them. And we can use assumed names if you're not comfortable giving your name, so don't worry about that. But do message us on Twitter or on Facebook to find out more. Next week's quite an interesting one as well, Neil. We're going to be looking at the UFO videos that the Pentagon released.
Ah, right.
So stay tuned for that one, folks, next week. In the meantime, keep watching those skies. That's it from me.
And that's it from me.
Until next time. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Aliens Explored is a Feagle Films production in association with Juicy Falls. Music by Darren Mafucci and editing by Stu Jackson. Find us on Twitter and Facebook by searching Aliens Explored or visit aliensexplored.com.